I call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Can the minister explain the impacts on communities like mine in Western Sydney of the previous government's decision to abolish offshore processing for people who arrived illegally by boat in 2008? How has the government acted to restore the effectiveness of offshore processing?
I call the Honourable Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, and I would say to those on my left that we would like to hear the answer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And can I commend the member for her question? I know, Madam Speaker, that the previous member for Lindsay had a very keen interest in the issue of border protection. Those who were here at the time will remember the good old Commander Bradbury, who accompanied the then Prime Minister all the way to Darwin. That's a long way from Penrith. He wasn't looking for the Nepean Bell, I'm sure. And I remember, Madam Speaker, that the previous member for Lindsay had to endure day after day, week after week, year after year of questions and other things raised with him by his own constituents because of the failures of the previous government. And at the heart, Madam Speaker, of the previous government's failures, at the heart of the previous government's failures, was their decision, as the member for Lindsay has reminded the House, was their decision to abolish offshore processing. They also abolished temporary protection visas, and even to this day they remain divided on that side of the House about temporary protection visas being restored. But, Madam Speaker, it is no surprise that we have had to restore offshore processing in the way it was designed, because those opposite never ever believed in it. And the Leader of the Opposition in particular, Madam Speaker, I note, described offshore processing in these terms. He said, Howard's Pacific solution is taking Australia down a sterile, dirty and nasty path. That's what the Leader of the Opposition actually thinks about offshore processing. He said on another occasion, Howard's actions, not Mr Howard, Howard's actions undermined humanitarian values and stirs divisions within the Australian community. Well, what I notice, Madam Speaker, is the only division that is stirred on the issue of offshore processing and temporary protection visas is on that side of the House, because they have always been divided on the issue of offshore processing, and that's why they could never implement it properly, Madam Speaker. They could never implement it properly because they didn't believe in it. And so when this government was elected, we've had to go about the process, Madam Speaker, of putting it back in place in the way it was designed. Under the previous government, when they were dragged kicking and screaming to reintroduce offshore processing under process, 1 in 20 people who arrived illegally by boat were sent to Nauru and Manus Island. And at the 11th hour, when they confected a press conference which was an implementation of a policy, Madam Speaker, it was just a press conference. What we inherited was a policy that was unfunded, under capacity, and had been constantly undermined by the previous government in its implementation. And that's why the Australian people threw them out, because they didn't trust them to run offshore processing. They know on this side of the House, they know that those on this side of the House believe in offshore processing, and under the new government, I'm pleased to say, it's back in business the way it was designed.